Hi, I'm Ellen Stofan, Undersecretary of Science and Research at the Smithsonian Institution, former director of the National Air and Space Museum, and former chief scientist of NASA. Thank you for joining us for this virtual session, Our Shared Future, Life on a Sustainable Planet. I'm honored to be speaking with you today at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. We are gathered here today because our planet faces monumental challenges, unprecedented and interrelated crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and planetary health. Yet despite all these challenges, we've gathered here in Glasgow, Scotland, in person and virtually to come together to work collectively towards global solutions, solutions that require our best science, solutions that require interdisciplinary approaches, solutions that engage diverse audiences, solutions that allow us to lead by example on sustainability, and solutions that fill us with hope and optimism for our planet and for all of the species that call Earth home. The Smithsonian was founded 175 years ago for the specific purpose of increasing and diffusing knowledge. As the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, we are a global leader in providing information critical for Earth's resilience and sustainability in the face of global change. With 21 museums, 9 research centers, 11 libraries, and the National Zoo, the Smithsonian is uniquely positioned to lead, given our long-term role in scientific research and data gathering, our museum collections, and our educational programs. Put simply, the Smithsonian has an unparalleled capacity to produce, curate, and communicate science to an exceptionally broad public. For nearly 2 centuries, the Smithsonian Institution has investigated the effects of climate change on natural systems using innovative tools to study various ecosystems over vast ranges of spatial scales. This provides us with the invaluable information about the multiple underlying drivers, interdependencies, and complexities of the current global challenges, and helps us develop effective evidence-based strategies to address them. For example, the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center on the Chesapeake Bay runs the longest climate change field experiment in the world, measuring ecosystem responses to artificially elevated levels of CO2. From tracking animal migrations to mapping global carbon cycles, our research provides us with strong insights into how to improve the health of people, animals, ecosystems, and the broader environment. The Smithsonian also has the unique capacity to bridge history, arts, culture, and science, which is critical in the understanding and mitigation of climate change. From culture-based solutions to nature-based solutions, we are applying our scientific and cultural expertise, our role as a convener, and our public-facing programming to accelerate climate action. Across the institution, we're expanding how we address environmental justice, gender, and cultural heritage. And with 30 million visitors and a large physical presence in Washington, D.C., we are also keenly focused on reducing our own footprint of energy, waste, and water. The Smithsonian's museums, as well as traveling exhibitions, publications, media, and online platforms, reach hundreds of millions of people each year across the world, engaging many to contemplate global change and humans' role in it. For example, the Deep Time exhibit at the National Museum of Natural History uses interactive games to teach visitors about the effects of climate change on their favorite things, be it soccer, chocolate, beaches, flowers, and discusses ways people can reduce their environmental impacts. Through a new initiative called Our Shared Future, Life on a Sustainable Planet, we have identified 3 ambitious goals to ensure that people and nature thrive. The first goal speaks to the Smithsonian's role in the increase of knowledge. The Smithsonian will continue to build a bedrock of understanding of the most diverse and threatened biological, ecological, and socio-ecological systems on the planet to understand the importance of these systems and safeguard their resilience in the face of global change, and to make this knowledge known to the world. This work will include research focused on the origin, evolution, and biology of ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity, on understanding and rebalancing the relationship between humans and nature, and to support the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of that diversity, and the equitable sharing of benefits. This will require a continued emphasis on foundational disciplinary research, the expansion of interdisciplinary collaboration, and increased investment in co-designed transdisciplinary research. We also have a foundational goal of diffusing knowledge. So for goal 2, the Smithsonian will use all channels and innovative approaches to engage and educate all audiences on what life on a sustainable planet means, and provide opportunities for all audiences to participate in meaningful ways. Planetary sustainability requires participation by all, and thus the Smithsonian will work to renew and strengthen the value of science and the practice of evidence-based thinking throughout American life and around the world. To further enhance the impact of our long-term research, we will make a concerted effort to translate scientific findings into policies working within multilateral frameworks such as the UNFCCC. Our exhibitions, public programs, and citizen science platforms will be used to engage the public on research-based solutions to climate change and other threats to ecosystems. In addition, the Smithsonian will support dialogue around the need for greater justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within both the sustainability and science communities, and to help educate all on environmental injustice and the path to environmental justice. To do this work, we will use our broad communication platforms and design our exhibitions and public programs to highlight science-based solutions and the critical intersection of science, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. For goal 3, we will lead by example. The Smithsonian will lead in museum operations and facilities sustainability and will incentivize its workforce and audience to learn to lighten their global impact. As one of the foremost research complexes in the world, the Smithsonian has long kept climate change, sustainability, and stewardship of the planet as a focus of our scientific research, as well as our operational decisions, a focus that spans across all aspects of the institution. We've developed a climate action plan to detail our institution-wide efforts to assess our vulnerabilities, enhance our resiliency, research the Earth systems, adapt to a changing climate and its effects, and to educate our staff and the public on the climate crisis. Because the Smithsonian is such a multifaceted organization, these initiatives are not siloed into certain parts of the institution. Instead, many areas, specifically our public programs, our research, our collections, our administrative functions, and our facilities infrastructure, which touch every part of the institution, are all vital to our ongoing approach to facing climate change. I'm now thrilled to be presenting our 2 panels with experts from across the Smithsonian that will be speaking to the important work we're doing on science, culture, arts, and education. The first panel will discuss advancing climate science for impact. You will hear from Smithsonian scientists undertaking collaborative long-term studies to understand the past, present, and future changes in oceans, forests, and agricultural landscapes, and learn how they're utilizing networks, collaborative approaches, and engaging local communities in the development of tools, methods, and programs to benefit people and nature. Panel 2 is on engaging youth and reaching diverse audiences. You'll hear from Smithsonian leaders who are developing programming at the local, at the national, and the global scale that builds confidence, develops skills, and inspires and instructs action to address local and global challenges. Thank you for joining this session. We hope that you are inspired by the work that the Smithsonian is doing through science, culture, art, and education. We want to extend an invitation to all of you to visit our museums in person and virtually, connect with our research centers, and utilize the rich digital assets and resources that are on our website. We look forward to continuing and expanding our collaborations with researchers around the world. Thank you again, and we look forward to playing our part in ensuring life on a sustainable planet.
Climate change is a global problem that requires not only global solutions, but also intensely local ones. From the densest forests to the most remote oceans, all parts of the world and the people that live in these places are being impacted by a changing climate. For more than 175 years, the Smithsonian has studied the effects of climate change on natural systems, investigating processes that occurred millions of years ago, as well as those occurring today, and modeling those that might occur in the future. Today, we'll hear from 3 Smithsonian scientists who are working to understand past, present, and future changes in oceans, forests, and agricultural landscapes through long-term collaborative research. To do this, they are utilizing networks and engaging local communities in the development of tools, methods, and programs to benefit not only nature, but also people. So my first question concerns 2 programs that the Smithsonian has pioneered and propagated via networks that illustrate this global to local approach. So I'll begin with you, Christina. How is the Smithsonian's approach to studying these changes across land and seascapes unique?
Yes, the Smithsonian leads a global consortium of forest researchers called ForestGeo, or the Forest Global Earth Observatory. And we have a unique approach to studying forests in that we're both intensely local and global at the same time. So in forest plots around the world, research is run, at each one led by a different group of researchers, mostly local researchers, always in collaboration with the local people. And at each site, we're intensively monitoring large patches of forest and mapping and identifying to species, every stem greater than 1 centimeter diameter or about the width of your finger. These are identified to species and measured in diameter. And this is repeated every 5 years. And all of these follow a standardized protocol, and we repeat this in forests around the world. We have 73 sites in 28 countries. And, so altogether we're monitoring more than 7 million trees, representing more than 12,000 species with over 15 million diameter measurements. This is a huge amount of information, and it's all standardized across these global forests such that we can compare the data and learn about how these forests are changing using this in-depth monitoring.
Thanks, Christina. Now, Pat, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the Smithsonian is doing something comparable for the coastal ocean.
Yeah, well, Marine Global Earth Observatory, MarineGeo, was inspired in many ways by ForestGeo that Christina just talked about. And it shares a lot of the same goals. It's both intensely local, but global. And our view of the marine world, oceans are vast, but our view of the marine world is very much focused at the land where it meets the sea. So we're interested in this part of the ocean because this is where we find very rich and diverse ecosystems like coastal wetlands, mangroves, marshes, seagrass beds. This is where biological diversity is at its highest in marine systems, and it's also where people live. And so bringing all these natural and human impacts together is the focus of marine geo. We have scientists that cross the biological sciences, ecology, biogeochemistry, geology, and our goal is to understand these systems in a way that we can make an impact. We collect a lot of very detailed data of the sort that Christina just described for forests and make it freely available to the public and to our fellow scientists so that we can advance scientific understanding, but also the application of science to on-the-ground needs.
Thanks, Pat. I'd like to turn now to another pioneering Smithsonian program. This one that is one that really puts a spotlight on people. And it's an excellent example of how the Smithsonian works on the ground. And in this case, with farmers and communities through something called the Bird Friendly Coffee Initiative. Ruth, can you explain a little bit about the Bird Friendly certification and how it supports forest health, biodiversity, livelihoods, and climate targets?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nancy. So coffee and cocoa cultivation overlap the majority of the biodiversity hotspots on the planet. They are also unique crops because they themselves are small trees and they can be farmed under a canopy of taller shade trees. These agroforestry systems, which just means crops with trees, support high levels of biodiversity, and they help to sequester carbon to fight climate change. Despite this, coffee and cocoa expansion are still driving deforestation in many regions. To combat this, the Smithsonian supports commitments that ensure zero deforestation in tropical commodity supply chains, because no farming system can conserve the same biodiversity or ecosystem services as tropical forests. We also provide the only certification on the market, Smithsonian Bird Friendly, that ensures coffee and cocoa are grown on farms that support local biodiversity and sequester high levels of carbon. This certification provides farmers with recommendations and economic incentives to retain these high levels of carbon and biodiversity on their farms. Our rigorous certification process promotes three basic solutions. The first is no new deforestation, with traceable supply chains and strong governance to ensure compliance. The second is conserving native vegetation adjacent to the farmed lands, either by conserving areas that still have native vegetation or setting aside areas to regenerate naturally. And the third is integrating a diversity of native shade trees into the farming system itself. With coffee and cocoa, we find that 30 to 40% canopy cover conserves a diverse wildlife community. However, agroforestry systems support different species than forest, and so a biodiversity landscape must include both forest and agroforestry components.
Thanks, Ruth. I'd like for my third question to step back a little bit and ask each of you how your work is contributing to our global understanding of climate change. Christina, let's start with your work since it's so timely, given the urgent need for this data in the IPCC and to determine the nationally determined contributions.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So building beyond Forest Geo's data, we've developed a global forest carbon database known as 4C, which has tens of thousands of published estimates of forest carbon stocks and fluxes. And we use this to help understand global patterns in carbon cycling and also how forests can help to mitigate the climate crisis. So we've used these data to contribute to help to updating the International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. And we've also started sending these data to the IPCC's emission factor database, which is being developed so that users can find data on emission factors and other parameters relevant to compiling the national greenhouse gas budgets and developing the nationally determined contributions.
Thanks, Christina. Pat, how is Marine Geo making a contribution in these efforts for understanding climate change?
Well, here again, I think there's strong parallels with Forest Geo. In these coastal systems, a lot of the carbon that's sequestered ends up in soils. In fact, we call these blue carbon ecosystems. Marshes, mangroves, seagrass beds are examples of blue carbon ecosystems, which occupy a fairly small sliver of the entire ocean, but sequester about half of the carbon that the ocean sequesters each year. And as such, these are carbon-rich ecosystems that, when disturbed, emit carbon back to the atmosphere as CO2 or methane. And therefore, there's vast potential in the way we interact and manage these coastal ecosystems to do it in a way that not only benefits the biodiversity of the ecosystem itself, but also benefits climate. And we're advancing this through our global network and have developed a database called the Coastal Carbon Network Atlas. And here you can find, I think we're up to 6,000 soil profiles that have a lot of detail about the amount of carbon that's there and how much is being lost under certain circumstances. And we are rapidly advancing the use of this both for predictive science, but for on-the-ground activities like nationally determined contributions. We endeavor to make this atlas available to people who are doing projects. They have a mangrove, for example, that's been converted to shrimp ponds. They want to restore it to a mangrove. They have a place to go to start that activity, to find out how much carbon would be there normally and where they can aim to restore the ecosystem to. So that's one example. And we're also, by the way, conducting a lot of experiments, very detailed, long-term experiments that will help us forecast the influence of these coastal blue carbon ecosystems on climate as it continues to change.
Thanks, Pat. And Ruth, how can working with coffee farmers help us understand climate change?
Sure, very short answer for you here. Integrating trees back into these coffee farming systems is a natural climate solution. This action can both preserve the carbon that's already on the landscape and also inset new carbon into the landscape when farmers plant new trees. Obviously, this relies on understanding which trees farmers want to plant and which trees they're most likely to retain. So a lot of our research actually is about farmer preference and farmer decisions when it comes to keeping trees, thinking about trees, and choosing which trees they can grow in nurseries and replant into their coffee farms.
Thanks, Ruth. We're running out of time, and so I'd like to end with one final question. In 2016, I helped the Smithsonian found the Earth Optimism Initiative out of the realization that we needed to shine a spotlight, not only the problems, but also the solutions to climate change. And the Smithsonian is part of so many successes and solutions in conservation, from the reintroduction of the black-footed ferret in the 1980s to the current work on coral restoration. There's not time to even begin to touch on all of these different efforts. But I'd like to ask each of you, can you quickly tell me what makes you optimistic personally about climate solutions?
Sure. So for the bird friendly program, the farmers we work with really value and are looking for ways to keep their forests, their trees, and their birds. This natural conservation ethic makes me optimistic. And I really look forward to finding ways with the bird friendly program that we can support the inherent conservation ethic that these tropical farming communities have.
Pat?
Yeah, well, I'm optimistic about something Ruth just mentioned, natural climate solutions. And what's beautiful about this idea is that we can restore the ecological function of our natural ecosystems, whether they're forest, marine, agricultural, we can manage these systems in a way that is good for the ecology of the system and good for the climate. We can have our ecosystem cake and eat it too. So this is very exciting.
And finally, Christina.
And I'll mirror what Pat just said, that the fact that we can use natural climate solutions both to protect our ecosystems and our biodiversity and to help mitigate climate change at the same time is wonderful. And, the fact that the world is gathered here at Cop26 to address climate change, recognizing the important role that these natural climate solutions have to play is definitely a cause for optimism.
Thanks so much to all of you for sharing the amazing work that the Smithsonian does, and also your individual commitment and enthusiasm to addressing the climate change problem.
Welcome everyone to session 2 of Smithsonian's Life on a Sustainable Planet, engaging youth and reaching diverse audiences. You've just heard from several outstanding Smithsonian scientists telling us how their research on climate and biodiversity is helping to protect communities and the environment. Now we'll hear from some of our cultural experts and educators who are empowering people with the knowledge and tools that they need in order to help an equitable transition to a more climate resilient future. Through education, outreach, and programming, Smithsonian is engaging broad and diverse audiences in solutions and storytelling around climate change, ecosystem-based adaptation, and conservation. In this session, we'll hear examples of how the Smithsonian is addressing climate change at the local, national, and global scales in a way that builds confidence, develops skills, and inspires much needed action to address local and global challenges. My name is Brian Coyle. I'm Program Director for National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute, and I'll be your moderator. I'm here with my colleagues, Jennifer Brundage, the National Outreach Coordinator for Smithsonian Affiliations, Katrina Lashley, Program Coordinator, Urban Waterways with the Anacostia Community Museum, and Richard Curran, Director of the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, Distinguished Scholar, and Ambassador at Large. Welcome, everybody. As the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, I'd like to have each of you share more about how your programs expand participation and create an inclusive conservation community that's prepared to address big challenges like climate change. And please tell us why this is so important. So Katrina, let's start with you and hear about how you're working with local communities in the Washington, D.C. area on environmental leadership.
Thanks, Brian. The Anacostia Community Museum is currently in the 11th year of its Urban Waterways project. There's been documenting the relationship between urban communities and their waterways. Our work has focused on the Anacostia River in Washington, D.C. and the state of Maryland, and its relationship with community members advocating for healthier communities. We've also been in conversations with communities both nationally and internationally. And so very early on, we became very aware of two very important facts, that we're really in conversations in terms of our ongoing relationship with the environment, and we needed a broader definition of what the environment is. And so our partners, who often view their work through the lens of justice and equity, define the environment as where we live, where we work, where we play, and where we pray. This definition is very helpful for us because it allows us to push back against the notion that the environment is somehow separate from our everyday lives. It also broadens the space for people to become involved in these various conversations. So people see room for themselves to become involved in these actions. They see their interests, their concerns, their lived experiences as essential steps forward in the creation of healthier, equitable, sustainable communities. And so as part of this work, we've been documenting the work of women, both locally, nationally, internationally, who have entered these environmental spaces for a variety of reasons, for a variety of disciplines. And some of our women we've worked with, they've been in their careers for 30, 40, 50 years. Others are mid-career, and others are just kind of thinking about their steps into these environmental spaces. And so we're very intrigued about what could happen when we could bring all these women into space and conversation to meet not only as professionals, but also as people. So who am I? Where do I come from? Who's my community? How do I go about engaging and thinking about in the environment? And why is this work essential? And so in 2018, we launched our Women's Environmental Leadership Initiative with a national summit, which brought women in conversation over the course of one day, looking at the notions of mentorship, education training, and also leadership as it is enacted. Mornings were spent in conversation, but also afternoons moved toward workshops addressing issues of particular concern to the Anacostia watershed and its communities. And looking at response from our attendees in that first year, we built toward a second summit with programming in 2019, which included dinner discussions, community forums, workshops, and a series of oral histories. And we found that through this work, women are building capacity for the next generation of leadership. And generation report is important. Many of our communities that we work with see this mentorship of the next generation of leaders as essential in terms of understanding where we stand in terms of facing our environmental issues and concerns, and what are some possible lessons we can take from the past moving forward into the present. And so we understand that in the broadening a definition of the environment, it invites for a larger participation in terms of communities who've often been absent for decision-making spaces, but also allows for a broader understanding and connection to the importance of maintaining stewardship in terms of our natural world, but also in our larger communities in terms of blue, green, and gray spaces.
Thanks, Katrina. I think your focus at the local scale and just individuals is so important to making everyone feel empowered, and then expanding that circle of environmentalists and perspectives, as you said. So Jen, through the Smithsonian affiliations, you're also taking a local approach, but in a way that's network across communities nationally. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brian. I'm so excited to be here. Smithsonian Affiliations is a program that cultivates a network of long-term partnerships with over 200 museums, universities, cultural and educational organizations across 46 states, Panama and Puerto Rico. And so through this collaborative network, we try to share the Smithsonian with folks in their own communities, but likewise, we are able to take local stories and local expertise and scholarship and bring national awareness to it. And so the reason we wanted to work with our partners on climate change is because we know, and we've heard, students care deeply about the climate, of course, but they don't always know how to take action. And there are a lot of organizations that are doing this kind of work, but it takes time for students to find the right fit. And we looked across this network and realized that our partners are also deeply invested in this kind of work, and that their after-school programs, their youth docent corps, their advisory boards are a wonderful opportunity to give students a chance to try out tangible, real-world, community-focused action. And so under the guise of Earth Optimism, which is a Smithsonian initiative that's all about taking action and sharing successful solutions, we invited all 18 partners in 14 different states to kind of customize to their communities how to work with young people. And the great thing about this collaboration, I think, is that we at the Smithsonian bring the intellectual framework of Earth Optimism, but we can't do this without the expertise of our partners, without their knowledge about their own communities, their own environmental issues, and how it's affecting their student populations. And so there was a lot of freedom within this structure. And what we saw was that over 1,000 students in these 18 different cities were exposed to environmental issues such as plastic reduction, invasive species, and habitat restoration. And they all took on projects of their own, which are varied depending on the environment that they're in and what they care most about and what is affecting their communities. And so the results that we've seen have been just terrific. We see students creating their own local groups, leading beach cleanups, working on habitat restoration, planting pollinator gardens on their school campuses. And so we're thrilled that we've been able to not only inspire action, but also hopefully leadership development in these students who are taking this well beyond what we had anticipated.
Thanks, Jen, for sharing this important work with partners across the United States. And I think, as we all know, young people are the engine for global change. So I really appreciate how much this networked approach is helping to mentor and connect young leaders in a way that not only combines their impact, but also magnifies that impact. Next, we'd like to talk with Richard about work at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. So your team is celebrating cultures from around the world and providing a platform for sharing traditions, celebrations, food, music, and more. Can you tell us what makes this approach so unique? And also, how is climate change impacting your work?
Well, for decades, we've been doing research and documenting people's lives and how they turn their lives into artistry and song and story and craftsmanship and so on, into food and recipes, how they feed their family. And so much of that is connected with the environment. As Katrina says, it's not like environment is separate from people's lives. If you can't grow the crops, if you can't catch the fish, if you can't collect the things in the rainforest, then you can't practice your culture. And so Folklife has been documenting how local cultures survive and flourish and express who they are and develop their identity over decades and decades. And that, of course, calls back, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands of years of built up tradition. And then we present that at our annual Folklife Festival on the Mall and through Folkways recordings, exhibits, presentations, and so on. Well, what we're seeing is that a lot of people can't catch the fish they caught. They don't sing those old songs because they don't matter anymore. Because they want to weave those baskets, but they can't get the materials they need to weave those baskets, and so on. And of course, with climate change, we're also seeing tremendous pressure for migrations around the planet as people leave the environment that's so meaningful to them. So if you have a sacred geography where your stories are all about these sacred mountains and these amazing historical sites that was so important to your community, and now you're moving away from them, it holds less meaning to the next generation. And we start facing the prospect of losing our cultural heritage. The things that connect us to the planet, our past, and our community. So, the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage is very intent on people's own documentation of their experience, documenting these changes over time, and also then having people present their own stories about what is happening to them, their community, and their local environment. It's very important that local people tell their stories to their neighbors and fellow citizens of the planet.
Thank you so much. And Richard, I'm just going to continue with our next question. Why is it so important for the Smithsonian to be playing this role of teaching, preserving, sharing, and activating in addressing climate change?
Well, for one, the Smithsonian has an amazing expertise. I mean, if you look at its cross-disciplinary nature, so the Smithsonian is a place that institutionally, combines ecologists, biologists, climatologists, anthropologists, historians, ethnomusicologists, and art historians, a whole range of experts that actually could collaborate and talk with each other about the changes that are happening, not only with the physical environment, but with the cultural environment as well. So I think that's important. I think the second one, of course, is the Smithsonian's long history. It's trusted. It's been doing this case of documenting the planet and documenting the world's cultures for a whole long time. I mean, like 175 years. And so we have the longitudinal data, we have the scientific and scholarly disposition to not only do that documentation and research work, but are also to help deliver that to the public we're kind of passionate about it, but in a non-biased, non-partisan way to say, this is indeed what's happening. And if you look in our archives, for example, in song and story, you can see those stories shifting over the past 100 years in response. So we have that longitudinal data that our collections allow us to build upon to be able to report on what's happening currently.
Thank you. And I think, you make a great point, and in this era of skepticism and misinformation, it's so powerful and important to have a place like Smithsonian where we do still have that trust and that reputation and to help people become more active in the environment. So Jen, could you also give us your perspective on why it's so important for Smithsonian to be playing this role in addressing climate change?
I think it allows us to kind of live that adage that we can think globally and act locally. Mm-hmm. Our network of partners, very trusted long-term partners, allows us to be both intensely local and intensely national at the same time. it allows us to be a force multiplier. And as Richard alluded to, because of our breadth, we can really magnify these local success stories in really prominent ways. And that comes with several benefits that I think are unique to us. For one, the solutions that work in rural Colorado or Miami can be seen by thousands and thousands and thousands of more people who might then be inspired to replicate them. But also importantly, it sends a message to the students that we care and are invested in their ideas, and that we look to them as leaders in their own communities, and being able to promote them in this way validates that feeling for them, makes them feel like, in fact, they can be leaders and that their voice does matter, and that, in fact, it is essential in leading climate change action. And so I think it's a very powerful way to help them feel more confident about stepping up and leading the kind of action that we need in the future.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and this theme keeps coming up about expanding this conservation community and bringing people into the fold. Katrina, could you also give us your perspective on why what the work that you're doing with so many different constituencies is so important in addressing climate change?
Yes, so we've always highlighted the agency, the power of the agency of our communities. We see the museum space as a civic space that actively reflects the realities and honestly explores the realities and the changes both environmental and social are impacting our community partners. So we stand for community partners in the present, but also trying to understand how we arrived at this moment. So what are the roots of this present? What are the historical events and people who have impacted where we are today? And what models and best practices can we pull from the past to address issues of the present? And also thinking about envisioning the futures and how do we use the past and the present to move to the futures that we envision. So for us, it's about this idea of community-based history, community environmental histories to understand the present, but also to act for the development of healthier, sustainable communities.
Excellent, thanks so much. So our final question, just a quick answer if you all would. Tell us in a few words, what makes you optimistic about a sustainable future? And Jen, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, I get so inspired with just listening to young people, empowered youth who find their voice, they can act on their passion with confidence, and they can understand their power as leaders in their own communities to affect change.
So for me, it really is about this idea of communities recognizing the legacy of their ongoing environmental work and advocacy. And so they're stepping into this larger ongoing community history of connection to place, a stewardship of place, and this idea that through ongoing efforts that change is possible and that there are steps forward in facing and addressing our various environmental issues.
Yeah, and I'd add to that human beings have always been creative and innovative. It's how we survive. It's how we have what we have now, if you take the long run of humanity. And I'm buoyed by the fact that people across the planet and so many communities are coming up with solutions that help them and help their lives to adapt to climate change, come up with solutions, and of course, share them more broadly with their fellow human beings. So in the summer of 2022, the Smithsonian will really give shape to the whole notion of Earth optimism by bringing to Washington, to the National Mall of the United States, the symbolic center of our country, practitioners, dozens and dozens of people from communities around the planet who are showing their optimism about the future, people who've invented and developed ways of sustainable agriculture and fishing and lifeways and so on that mark the way that they and their communities can flourish on the planet and help save what befalls us and pass on their culture, their wisdom, their knowledge and artistry to future generations. So they'll be demonstrating the ways they do this in their local community to perhaps 1 million visitors to the National Mall of the United States. Last week of June, first week of July in Washington. We look forward to seeing everybody there and investing in the optimism about solutions to issues on our planet.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for these interesting and inspiring perspectives about why you are optimistic about our shared future. And I want to also thank everyone for watching and for everything that you all are doing to make our world a better place.